Now, if I'm honest, there are certain things that are better to do alone. Am I right in this? How about this? Isn't it better to shop alone? Right? You know, when someone's, you feel like they're like, oh, come on, are we done yet? Right? And you're thinking, oh, I got to rush. I'm going to miss some groceries I was going to get. Or you're not sure if they want to go in the store you want to go in, and you're like, I want to spend some time here. So it's maybe something better. How about this? How about trying a brand new recipe that you're not sure is going to work? Isn't that a little better to do on your own, right, as opposed to when company's coming? I see a couple of people laughing over here because they did that recently. How about eating in bed, where all the crumbs drop on the bed? You're like, you know what? I don't want anybody telling me that I can't do this. Or how about honing your dance moves in front of the mirror by yourself, right? See, I just did that in front of all of you all. It's terrible, right? Or how about this, guys? Crying at a sad movie. A movie that's an animation about a fish called Nemo, right? You want to do that alone. Some things in life really are better alone. Walking through the desert is not one of those things. We're in the 4th week of our series called Lessons from the Desert, and in it we're using the wanderings of Israel who went from Egypt, where they were in as slaves, to the Promised Land. And we're using that wandering, that time in between as a metaphor for how we often go through the deserts in our lives. And we're pulling lessons from that. We've looked at a couple different ones in terms of complaining and lamenting and so on. And I want to look at a different one today. But let me ask you this. When you think of wandering in the desert, I wonder if you think what a lot of people think, which is this picture, right? A caravan, camels, right, walking through the desert. I mean, that's what we think of wandering through the desert. That's usually what we picture. Historically, and this has been going on, by the way, for thousands of years, historically, when they would put caravans together, they would do that to travel across these harsh sections of desert. It was usually a very hazardous trip. Well, they did it for a variety of reasons. Because you might think, well, why do it in a caravan? Why not just do it alone, right? Why do I have to have other people with me? Well, there were 3 main reasons they did this. One was because it was easier to accomplish the goal. If your goal was economics, you wanted to make more money, it was actually better to do this with other people who could carry more stuff, you could bring more things to market, you could actually get what you needed, you could actually get where you needed to go better. Second reason was safety and security. Because there were bandits, there were people who would, if you were traveling alone, would attack you. They wouldn't attack a larger group, but lone travelers, they would attack, they would kill, they would take your stuff. And support. From illness, from injury, from anything that might happen on this trip. The quickest way to die was to travel the desert alone. Now, that's true in a physical sense, but it's also true as we go through the deserts of our life that we've been talking about. Whether you're in one, whether you've been in one, or when you go through the next one, it's not meant to be alone. We've said through this entire thing that the desert is fertile ground for transformation. In other words, to be changed. And the kind of change we've been talking about, the kind of change that God wants to do in us, cannot happen when we walk the desert alone. So I might say it this way: the desert is not meant to walk alone. Now, I think there are 2 sets of people in here that are listening to me this morning. There are those who love people, and you're thinking, all right, this is a good message. This is going to talk about relationships. This is going to talk about people, and you're loving it already. Okay? Now, by the way, those people that think like that still often withdraw and get alone when they're in the desert. But I mean, you get it. And then there's the people who cringe when we talk about relationships. Because the first thing you thought of when I put that up is, I like being alone. I don't want to be around people. Being with other people doesn't help me. I don't want to have a bunch of people in my business. So, let's define aloneness. Because here's the thing, aloneness has nothing to do with whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. You can be in a large group of people and be totally alone, right? You've probably been there. Plus, you could be by yourself or with almost nobody and not be alone. So that's not really the defining thing. That's not what we're talking about. When the Bible talks about aloneness and what we're going to look at today, what it means is simply this. Aloneness is to isolate and separate yourself such that you carry the full load of your burdens. Aloneness is having to bear a burden by yourself that other people could help you carry. And that has never been God's design. So even though we shouldn't do this, and most of you will probably intellectually agree with me in this, that, yeah, I know we shouldn't really walk the desert alone. It seems to be what we naturally default to. It's what we do. It's kind of, you've seen it in people in your life. You've probably experienced it. Maybe you've done this. When you get into those difficult times in your life, we tend to isolate. And there's a natural progression to this. This is typically how it would happen. The progression of aloneness starts, we begin to become overwhelmed, right? And it might be something that you're dealing with. Maybe it's sickness in the family. Maybe it's financial issues. Maybe it's just, a really bad season. And you're kind of trying to cope, but it becomes to become increasingly overwhelming. You know, the kind where you're just like, oh, I can't even think about this anymore. Every time I do, it feels like there's so many things. I don't know how to handle this. You kind of begin to get a little bit emotionally wound up. Things are going really well. You can't figure this out, and now you are overwhelmed by it. Which usually leads to the second step, which is we decide that others are a part of the problem. So this can be a couple different things. We decide, you know what? I'm overwhelmed. Nobody understands me. They don't get me. They don't understand me. Yeah, I know they say they're doing the same thing or they've gone through the same thing as me, but they really don't get it. Or you might even think they are the problem. The reason I'm in the desert is because of them. If they would have, you know what? If I just separate myself from them, all my problems will go away. They don't have a clue what I need. They don't know what the next steps are. Which then leads to a third step, which is kind of an either or both step, which is we then say, okay, well, I'm going to take control. I'm going to control my situation. After all, I'm the only one who can figure this out. I might figure it out with God, I might figure it out with my own, but I can figure this out. And so we make goals, we make lists, we organize, we try and take control of our situation, we get efficient, we sleep less, we're working longer hours, or we shut down. And we say, you know what? This desert is so overwhelming, nobody else gets me. I don't even know where to start. So you know what? I'm just going to flee into whatever's going to help me cope. And we find ourselves reluctant. I'm not going to open up and go over this again and again with people. I don't want to talk about it anymore. We withdraw. We begin to miss connections with people. And it seems like the right choice because after all, I have so much to deal with. Or I'm tired, or I'm depressed, and I just don't feel like it. We either drive people away or we put up walls that keep them out. And the more we do this, the less likely we are to change. Because honestly, the last thing we want in there is a lecture or for someone to feel sorry for me. And we think, when things get better, then I'll re-engage with people. But my friends, the desert was never meant for us to walk it alone. So I'm going to take you through two events that happened in the wanderings of the Israelites. They're going to help us to form us in this area. I'm going to go over the two events and then make three observations about those events. One you'll probably be very familiar with because these happened within a few months of each other. One you'll be very familiar with. The other is actually touching on something we talked about last week with the lament, and we're going to tie these together. So let me take you through. It starts out like this. Now Jethro, the priest of Midian and father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. So either out of Egypt now, they've kind of moved on, they've gone past Mount Sinai, they have this loose kind of structure for their nation. And so Jethro's heard about this. He's had people come by and say, oh, you should see what happened. This is amazing. So Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with Moses' sons and wife, who must have been there for a little retreat or getaway or going back to see family, came to him in the wilderness where he was camped near the mountain of God. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed down, he kissed him, they greeted each other, and then they went into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they'd met along the way and how the Lord had saved them. It just would be an amazing story. Like he's sitting there, they're eating, they're just having a great time. He's telling them about all these things. And Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel. In rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians, he said, praise be to the Lord, who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God. Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. In other words, like, man, Moses is important, and his father-in-law is here, and we're going to come together. We're going to celebrate together. And the next day, Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning until evening, off to work. But his father-in-law decides, I'm going to tag along. I'm here, got nothing else to do. Let me see my son in action, my son-in-law in action. And so he watches Moses all day, and they get to the end of the day, and they do one of those debriefs at the end of the day. Here's how it goes. When his father-in-law saw that all Moses was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening? And Moses answered, because the people came to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me. I decide between the parties. I inform them of God's decrees and instructions. Do you know what a good father-in-law would have done right here? Good job, son. You're killing it. Man, you are doing awesome. I watched you today. I can't believe you're so capable. Just keep on doing it. You're obviously bringing God's word to these people. You are amazing. I just want to encourage you. Moses' father replied, what you're doing is not good. Literally the exact opposite, right? I'm sorry, son-in-law, you're talented, but man, you are messing this up. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work's too heavy for you. You can't handle this alone. Listen now to me. I'll give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representatives before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions and show them the way they're to live and how they're to behave. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, then have them bring the difficult cases to you. Simple cases, they can handle for themselves. That will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Fascinating story. Moses is going down the wrong path. He's trying to take the burden on himself. And this passage is often used as a leadership lesson. It talks about delegation, spreading the work around. I think those are all really good lessons, but I wonder if there's something more basic and maybe a little bigger at play here. Because it's only a few weeks later, maybe a few months at most, that we come to another event. And we touched on it last week a little bit when we were talking about lamenting, but it was a few months later, if you remember, the people were complaining because they didn't want manna, they wanted meat, they were so upset they wanted to kill Moses. And if you remember, right, last week, Moses is so distraught that he asks God to kill him, like he's suicidal. And it's not just that he was overworked or that he was taking on too much responsibility. I mean, this is deep, soul-wrecking stuff that is going on. Emotional, spiritual reaction to the expectations of others, this unsatisfying situation. And he goes to God with this. We talked about how you do that, how you do lament well. And if you remember, here's how God responded. The Lord said to Moses, and by the way, it's interesting because, we'll come back to that in a second. The Lord said to Moses, bring me 70 of Israel's elders who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting, that they may stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take some of the power of the Spirit that is on you and put it on them. They will share the burden of the people with you, so you will not have to carry it alone. Now, I find it interesting that God's solution for Moses was not to take him out of the desert. He didn't fix his circumstances. He didn't make it easier. He didn't actually materially change anything. He didn't tell Moses, just suck it up, buttercup. Come on, you can do better. He didn't do any of that. His solution was to give him help. So Moses went out. He told the people what the Lord had said, and he brought together 70 of their elders. He had them stand around the tent. And then the Lord came down in the cloud, and he spoke with them, and he took some of the power of the Spirit that was on him, and he put it on the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied. It was a one-time thing. They did not do it again. And then Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp. And you think, well, that kind of feels a little anticlimactic. The elders prophesied. It was evidence that the Holy Spirit was resting on them and equipping them. And then they all went home. But something had shifted here that was really, really important for Moses. Everything was not the same. Friends, we're not supposed to walk the desert alone. And these two stories from the life of Moses, they demonstrate, I think, three things, three observations I get out of that I think will help us in this. Here's the first one. Aloneness, the reason we don't walk the desert alone is because aloneness results in a skewed perspective. What happens is this. Moses, in the first case, felt like it was all his responsibility. He was taking it all on himself. He was like, man, this is what God gave me, the job. I mean, I'm the one who led them out of Egypt. I guess I have to satisfy. I mean, I have to listen to all the things. I have to do all the judging, and he had to carry it out. And in the second case, he feels like he's responsible for making all the people happy. He was the one who had to satisfy them. And he's worn out by it. And what happens? He says, I want to die. Everything is so bad. Nobody gets me. See, this is the problem. When we get in the desert and we withdraw and isolate, our perspective is off. Let me give you an example. That is a scary thing. I don't know where the guy rode off, but he's clinging on for his dear life till you see the rest of the picture. And then what about if you shift the picture? Perspective. Completely different. See, here's what happens. We get in the desert and we feel like the guy hanging from the cliff. I'm hanging on by my mere fingers. I can't do anything. Nobody can help me. Everything's a mess. And the people around you are going, whoa, 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 whoa. It's not what you think. We have a different perspective. We can see things that you can't. We're not as emotionally invested in this as you are. When we isolate, we begin to take on more responsibility than is actually ours. We feel like we have to do everything. We try to do too much. We try to control too much. We lose sight of the overall mission of kind of where we're going and what we're trying to accomplish. And we get tunnel vision. Have you ever tried to walk through a forest in a straight line without a compass? Right? I don't know if you've ever done this when you're out hiking or you're in the woods. And it's impossible. Because what happens is you walk for about 8 feet and then there's a tree. Right? You got to go around the tree. But then there's another tree. And then there's a gully. And it kind of shifts off this way. And then it kind of goes back up over here. And then there's, thorns over here. So it is literally impossible to walk in a straight line. Because once you get walking in the forest, you lose all perspective as to where you're going. And if you don't have a compass that says, that's the direction we're going to go, you get lost. When you're walking through the desert, people are your compass. They're there to help. They're there to say, no, this is the direction. This is where you want to go. This is where God is taking you. And we lose our ability in the desert to interpret what is going on, and the filter we have is off. We are not infallible. You are not infallible. You are not the one who can see everything exactly the way it actually is. You're not the exception to the rule. That is not meant to walk alone because our perspective gets skewed. We don't actually see things for what they are. That's observation one. Here's observation number two. Aloneness leads to exhaustion. I don't know if you noticed what was going on in this, but there's a physical exhaustion that comes when we're in the desert. And you have experienced this. If you've ever been in the desert, especially if you've been in it for a while, it's exhausting, physically exhausting. Look what his father-in-law tells Moses. He says, you and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. You're getting physically exhausted. And what happens in the desert way too often is we get physically exhausted, but we just find ourselves going through the motions. There's this loss of effectiveness. We're just kind of doing what we have to do. We're enduring. We're just trying to do the absolute minimum that has to get done to go from A to B. That's all we're doing, right? Hobbies don't interest us anymore. We feel tired all the time. Right? We find ourselves just pushing through because you have to do it when all you really want to do is nothing. What I find fascinating is not that Jethro said, it's going to wear you out. What does he say? It's going to wear you out and them. Your physical exhaustion in the middle of the desert doesn't just wear you out, it wears the people out around you. But it's more than that. It's not just physical exhaustion. It's emotional exhaustion. We saw that in the second one. When he's in the midst of all this, he's in the end of his rope. He says, God, if you're going to treat me like this, just go ahead and kill me. He's got no emotional bandwidth left. I mean, collapse, complete loss of energy, of desire, of perspective. Moses comes to God. He's ready to die. I'm done. He has nothing left. See, because when we're emotionally exhausted, and you can usually see when this happens, because when we're emotionally exhausted, everything sets us off. Things that normally would just roll off your back, they just irritate you. There's things that bug you. There's things that make you angry. There's things that make you want to just throw up your hands, and our emotions are right close to the surface, or we bury them down so deep that we just go down through life feeling kind of wooden and fuzzy. And on top of all that, it leads to spiritual burnout. Why have you brought this trouble on your servant, God? What have I done to displease you? You put the burden of all these people on me. Like Moses, this is the whole lament thing we talked about last week. But he's spiritually exhausted. It's impacting his relationship with God because we become skeptical. God, you don't even really care anyway. Like, I don't even know that you're paying attention. Like, if you really love me, I wouldn't be through this desert. You would have given me at least the reason why I'm going through the desert. Prayer becomes a chore. Reading the Bible is something like, oh, I don't feel like doing that today. And it was that spiritual exhaustion, if you remember last week, led Moses to God to lament. But when we reach this exhaustion, this aloneness leads us to this physical, this emotional, this spiritual exhaustion, we are in danger of being taken out. That's why the desert was never meant to walk alone. Which leads me to our third observation, which is, well, so what? What do we do? We have to fight our aloneness tendencies. Because the logic goes like this. I'm in a tough place. I need to get fixed. I need to deal with all the things that I'm going to deal with. I need to focus on me. Have you ever heard that? I need to take some time off just to focus on me. Most narcissistic statements you can ever say. I'm going to quit the things I'm doing. I'm not going to be engaged. When I get to a better place, then I'm going to re-engage. But until I get better, I'm just going to check out of everything. Now, we do need to grow and examine and be willing to hear God about us, to introspect, to listen to God, but we never do this in a vacuum. Because there is a danger here, right? The other danger is not only just to be isolated, but only to connect with people who reinforce your desert experience, right? You've been around those people. Like, you always hang out with that same person who gossips about the same thing and says, oh yeah, your life is miserable, I can't believe it, your kids are bad, your husband's bad, everything's bad, I agree with you, woe is us. That doesn't help either. That's not the definition of not getting isolated. Because here's the thing, God has actually equipped all this for your benefit. Look at the first one. He says, these people, Moses, I want you to find some people, capable people, they're going to share the burden with you so you don't have to do it alone. I mean, these were people who were capable. They had skills. They could actually do stuff that Moses was doing. I mean, they already had all the leadership skills. And then we go on in the Numbers. It says he brought 70 of their elders together. In other words, he says, I want you to bring people, they're already leaders. They're already elders in your church, in your community. They're already doing stuff. They have leadership skills. People acknowledge them as leaders. And I'm actually going to put my spirit on them. They are equipped for you. There are people that God has put in your life for the express purpose of helping you walk through your desert. Do not push them away. It's why we talk about in Atlanta Road Alliance Church the need for relationships and how we say, come as you are and be changed, and we do that in the context of relationship. It's why life groups are so important, why having relationships with people are so important, because you can't walk through it alone, not well. But that has an implication. That means we must seek those people. I find it interesting that in both cases, Moses got instructions, but he had to go do it. It says he chose capable men. In other words, Moses had to say, all right, what do you think, Joshua? Who do we got? Let's go start asking. Let's go find these people. And it wasn't just a couple, because they had the captains or people over thousands and hundreds and 50s and 10s. So he had to go find these people. He had to go recruit them. He said, all right, guys, I can't do it alone. I need your help. Come help me out. And the second says he actually had to go and say, all right, elders, you guys, these 70, you guys are obviously in leadership. Come on in. I need your help. We must choose to reach out. You cannot wait when you're in the desert for other people to come to you. It will just reinforce your aloneness tendencies. Because here's the thing. If you are in your desert and you are alone, it's no one's fault but yours. And I have heard so many people in the course of my 15 years of pastoring say, well, no one called me. No one reached out to me. And I say, well, who did you call that didn't listen to you? And they say, well, I didn't call anybody. But you wanted someone to reach out to you. Moses didn't say, or God didn't tell Moses, his father, and say, hey, just sit around and wait, and eventually you'll have leaders that will come to you, and when they do, appoint them. He says, no, go get them. Go find them. You can't do this alone. You need people. This is a humbling process. It means we have to admit that we need help, and we just might not be right. And what I have found in the church, and this is true in my own life, and I've seen it over and over and over, and we are in a church that is filled with people who love to serve other people. You guys are amazing at that. And almost all of us are not very good at asking for help. Oh, I'll do anything for anybody. You can call me anytime, any place, and then something happens. I say, did you call anybody? No, I didn't want to bother anybody. Can't do that. When we're walking the desert alone, there's something in there that God says, no, you need to humble yourself and say, look, just, can you come by? Can we go for coffee? I got to talk. Which means we have to know people well enough to let them in. But that can be hard, can't it? It's difficult. So here's the corollary truth that goes along with that. We must actively come alongside those who are in the desert. Means we have to know people well enough to know that they're in a desert. Again, that's why we do life groups, because when someone's struggling, we can say, hey, things aren't all right. You said you were okay, you're not okay. And let me give you one little bit of advice, because I've done this, and God has convicted me on this. Do not tell people, if you need anything, let me know. Do you know what that statement is? It's a statement to make you feel better, and they'll never call you. Hey, can I help you with this? Hey, what's going on this week? Can I do this? What are the things that you need help with? How can I come along and help you in your space? Is there anything that I can do to make your life a little bit easier as you're focusing on that? Can I give you a ride? Be specific. Engage. We have to actively walk alongside people. Be creative. Do something. Nowhere was this more apparent to me than when my father died. And I was of the camp because I never really had to go through a really deep death before that in my own life. And when people would die, and then people would bring them meals, and I thought, why? The entire family's together. I mean, you have more than enough people. Just order pizza. Like, why are we bringing food? Until my father died, and people started showing up with food. And it was an incredible blessing because it allowed us as a family to just be together and to mourn and to talk and not have to worry about that. And I realized there is something we can all do to help people who are going through deserts in their life. The desert is not meant to walk alone. When we do it, we have a skewed perspective. I've yet to see someone who isolated themselves from their church, from their family, from their friends, who had an accurate view of their life or their problem. Always off. Every time. We want to fight that alone tendency because God's like, I put people in your life that can help you walk through this. They're actually there for you. I put the right people with the right gifts to help you right now. So get to know other people. Invite them in. And if you're not going through a desert, even if you are, look for other people who are and say, how can I help in this? What can I do? Maybe I can try this. You know, there's a verse that we read at weddings all the time. It's a proverb from a long time ago that encapsulates what God has designed in relation to this. See if I didn't do the verse. You guys all know it. It's from Ecclesiastes. It says this: the one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. And do you remember how the rest of it goes? A cord of 3 strands is not. Right, we've all heard this. I mean, Paul said it this way: bear each other's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. There's something about aloneness that runs contrary. And you've all heard that verse, but maybe a visual will help. A single strand breaks really, really easy. And you get in the desert of your life, and the circumstances can just snap you. That verse says, well, hey, if I take several of us, that's a lot. All right. Now, what if I take more? What if it ends up being a whole community of people together? And you've all seen this. You've all used rope. What do they do with rope? They braid it. They twist it together. Can't break it. Why? First of all, they're bound together. They actually give the strength it needs. And when you do the research on this, it's actually very interesting. What they tell you is the reason they do this, and by the way, if you ever go across the Delaware Memorial Bridge or any of these bridges and you look at the cables, they're braided cables. Why? Because if any one of those strings loosens or breaks, the entire thing keeps its strength. Which means when you're going through the desert and you feel like you're broken, the reason that you'll be supported and be able to go through is because other people are doing it with you. And in fact, what they'll tell you is the friction of being together actually contributes to the strength of the cable. It's the picture that God is saying. See, look, when you're in the desert, don't walk it alone. You need to be in this with people, because if you do this alone, if you only have that one person who always supports your point of view, if you're actually isolating yourself, you're just fair game for Satan. He's going to take you out. Instead, get with people. Let them wrap themselves in your life. Seek them out. It'll be amazing what God can do. So let's be a church that gets entwined in each other's lives. To challenge, to love, to speak truth, to cry with, to walk alongside. Let's be a people that do not walk the deserts of our life